Well, good morning and welcome. I'm hosting the Kearney's International Women's Day Forum today. My name is Shivani Parekh. I'm the global lead of Kearney's Women's Network, and I'm so proud that we're going to be hosting 54 events as part of IWD this year, both virtual and in person all around the world. Our forum this year in 2024 is dedicated to creating a future that works for everyone. As we all know, our world is changing faster than we can imagine. And with that change, we need to ensure that women have an active voice and role in shaping the outcomes that we want to see. And so our voices are central and need to be part of the conversations that are shaping our future. Throughout this week, we've been highlighting exceptional women leaders and topics, and we're all building towards an inclusive tomorrow, and in particularly critical areas such as healthcare and technology, and also creating workplace culture and leadership that's very inclusive. We need to continue to amplify women's voices and create this future, but not just for women, but for everyone. So we're so glad to have you here today, really championing these topics. And our discussion today is really going to be about championing equity through leadership. And why does leadership matter in this journey? Because it's really the leaders that are going to make this change, whether it's a position on a board, an executive team, or really shaping the culture and the attitudes and the ways of working within an organization. Leaders set the tone. And when leaders champion diversity and having equity and all of the voices included, this is what really makes the difference in the workplace. So by fostering this environment where women are empowered to lead, we are going to unlock a wealth of talent, creativity, and innovation. And we continue to see this. When there's more diversity, there are better outcomes. So with that in mind, I'm so honored to introduce our panelists. Susan Loosmore, the Executive Vice President of Financial Planning and Analysis at T-Mobile, and Theresita Richard, the Chief People and Culture Officer at Patagonia. Thank you both for joining us today and for sharing your incredible insights with our audience. So to get us started and kick us off, Theresita, I wanted to start with you. You've got such an extensive background that started with a degree in engineering, and it's shaped your approach to taking on big challenges within life and within your organizations. You've moved from operations into HR and various leadership roles, including roles at P&G, Home Depot, Target, and Starbucks. And throughout that, taking on challenges in workforce innovation and DEI. Given today's topic, could you share a bit about what we really mean when we talk about equity, what it is, what it isn't, and what it means to your organization at Patagonia?
Yes, for sure. It's great to be with you today and to be with everyone. When I think about what equity is and what it is not, I start with the fact that equity is really about the systems, the structures, the conditions that create a specific experience. And it's the recognition of the fact that those systems, those structures, those conditions, they impact us in different ways. And so you can actually see that there are gaps that are created by that. And so I talk about the work of equity as minding the gap. It literally is getting specific and being able to identify where those gaps, where those disparities are that are truly caused by the systems and the structures. And then being able to do the work of either dismantling those systems, rebuilding those systems, or reshaping those systems so that they work for all. And so one of the things that I will often say that equity is not an approach that everyone gets the exact same thing. What it does is it deeply attends to and understands that people's experiences are different and that those experiences have been shaped by systems and structures. And so the work of equity is our work of attending to those systems and those structures.
That's really well said, Theresita. It's really about where we're starting versus where we're ending, not creating an equal ending point. I think that's amazing. Just wanted to turn to you, Susan. You come from a deep background in wireless, and starting with Macaw Cellular, which became AT&T, then Nordstrom's, and then, of course, at T-Mobile, where you've been spending the last 15 years of your career holding various leadership positions, including now being a part of the CEO's leadership team in your role as EVP of FP&A. Could you share a bit about what you think equity means for your organization at T-Mobile?
Yeah, I mean, DE&I at T-Mobile really is all about increasing leadership in diversity of our people, of our suppliers, of our customers, and we want to make sure that we're providing a platform to basically foster inclusion. But that has been a journey. I think for me, what might be interesting to all you is just a little bit of the journey and observation that I've seen and kind of how we have been bringing this to life over time. I'm going to go back and kind of take a page out of history, go back memory lane a little bit, and actually, Shivani, to the point where you and I actually initially met. But a little over 10 years ago, we were at a real low point in our company where we were losing customers. We were being purchased by AT&T. We lost a bunch of leadership. We were just kind of waiting to be acquired. Well, that deal unfortunately fell through because the government came in and said, nope, that's just, too much in terms of a monopolistic situation. So with that was a real pivotal point in our journey where we actually kind of had to start from scratch. And with that, we brought in new leadership. We brought in for the first time a leader of DE&I. We actually, at the point, we merged with another company. We became public. We kind of spun away from our parent company out of Germany. Shivani, this is when you and I first met, which was, hey, we were all about reinventing ourselves. And we recognized as a company that not only did we need to start solving pain points of our customers, we needed to ensure that this was just a great place to work. And so what I think is interesting is that so much of where we've come is starting and born over 10 years ago was really that leadership and that tops-down approach of really leaning in and creating the platform for people actually to start to lean in on DE&I. At the same time, if you look at our employee base, we're about, a third of us are corporate, a third of us are in retail stores that are spread all across the company. We have another third probably in call centers all across the company. And with that comes diversity just from the foundational element. And so when we had this tops-down approach and really opening up, a world to start to invest in DE&I, coupled with all of these people who had ideas, but they just needed a little bit of investment, a little bit of structure, as Theresita kind of shared with us. And we just needed to have that tops down meet that bottoms up. And all of a sudden, we just saw all these grassroots efforts come to life. Pride Parade. I could go on and on and on about where people wanted to spend their time, and we gave them the ability to do that. And that has just honestly created such a great culture here. ERGs were all of a sudden established. And, this goes back again to this 2013, space. And it's just been such a great ride. And by the time we got to 2019, we had over 50% of our employees belonging to some type of ERG. And so it's been just a great journey. And it just, we put again that structure in and allowed our folks to really start to guide us where they want to spend that time and investment. And here we are today.
That's great, Susan. I really like how both of you shared very different dimensions of what this means. Creating equity in the organization, and it has an impact on culture, morale, as well as systems and structures. So it's really great to hear that. One of the things that we've talked a lot about is that, unfortunately, there is a lot of sentiment out there where not everyone agrees on this topic. And many people don't have the privilege of working in organizations where this is embraced by leaders and by the whole organization. And in fact, we stand at a moment where there's a lot of, different kinds of conversations happening around the topic of DEI. I wanted to both ask you, how are you thinking about the opportunities and the potential that we have going forward? And maybe start with you, Theresita, about how do we build this and create a more inclusive and positive momentum out of this moment?
Yeah, I think the piece that I take in your question is, what does it look like to sustain? And what does it look like not only to endure, but to come through this time stronger. And I'm reminded of Dr. King's quote where he talks about the arc of justice is long. And that is what this work is about, right? It is long work, it is generational work. And it's one of those places where you have to have a discipline of hope. And the fact that there are pieces that we may not see in our lifetime, but it doesn't mean that we stop doing the work. And so for us at Patagonia, one of the pieces that has been very important is to ground this in our values. And 2 years ago, we introduced a new value after having a set of values for 35 years. And that was a value of justice. And so you say this huge word, it's this big word, justice. What is that? What does that mean? How do we get there? Well, it required us to take a real deep look inward and to tap into our value of integrity and do that hard work of saying, where are we? Where have we been complicit and have been a part of, these structures and systems and where we are today and where are the places where we need to go? That work is still required. I think in this time, in order to sustain, it starts with the commitment that you won't give up and that you won't back down. And part of that is like really being able to get into back to that definition around equity. And we refer to our work in the space of justice, equity, and anti-racism, recognizing that we have to be able to attend to how we work as an organization. What are the systems that are at play? What are the structures that are at play? How are we creating the conditions? And how does that connect to leadership from the lens that our work as leaders is really to create the conditions for our mission, our purpose to come to fruition, for people to thrive, for those whom we serve, our communities, our customers to be able to thrive as well. And so we look at this as mission work. We look at this as purpose work. And then a big piece for us is this bias for action and saying, how does that show up in our day to day? And I think that becomes really important because you will face pushback. You are going to run into challenges. If you don't, I question if you're in the work, right? It's kind of like by the very nature of being in this work, you're going to face challenge and you're going to come up against barriers. But those are the times where your values and your commitment really, really shine through. And we often talk about this isn't a trend. And this isn't about a fad or being in like the popular crowd. This is about what is the thing that is truly going to move our purpose forward. And we talk about our purposes. We're in business to save our home planet. And often in those conversations, we start to tag on kind of for whom and with whom. And what does that look like? Because it's going to take all of us to be able to do that. And so that at its core, that's that hope that we hold on to. And we commit to in the discipline of this work.
That's really inspiring because you're taking a long view. It's really about sustaining. There are always going to be environmental or societal dynamics that are for and against and pushback. And if you're not getting the pushback, maybe you're not trying hard enough. I like that. Susan, maybe you might share your views in this sort of volatile environment.
Yeah, it certainly resonates what Theresita just mentioned. We have kind of a slogan here, we won't stop. And that is something that's said. In fact, they just actually gave me a neon light that's now in my office, says we will not stop. And, I'm going to pick up a little bit on our journey and our story as a company and even acknowledge a little bit what's happening around us in society and in the global environment. But, you come into, say, 2020, where we already had kind of a little bit of a political situation that was, maybe challenging for some. And then you throw on top of that the pandemic, then you've got vaccination, non-vaccination, you've got a lot of choice points. You're now actually starting to see people like kind of, move to the left, move to the right. Then we have the social, unrest come forth with George Floyd. And then for T-Mobile, we actually merged in the middle of this with Sprint. And so we had just so much going on and we were feeling it. We were working out of our homes and at kind of a very stressful time. And so as leaders, we had to kind of step back to say, how do we facilitate the right conversations, knowing this is tough times for our people, And so we really tried to start having authentic conversations. It started with leadership, just opening up with panels for people talking about what had happened with, George Floyd. And for some people, what did that mean to them? And these conversations are hard, not easy. And even, for me, I opened up some of these conversations, and I try to be very authentic and very real. And it's uncomfortable. And we went through that, and there was unrest in the org, in the world. But what was interesting is we really actually, from an HR perspective, started to lean into our survey and really wanted to take the pulse of people so that we could get data, get an understanding of what was on people's mind, where were some of those attentions that were needed. And so we carved out a whole section around DE&I questions that supported these efforts so that we get some feedback. And we actually, got that feedback. We got to see those verbatims, and that information is powerful so that we can actually continue to grow and curate and make sure that we're listening and we're taking action and we are constantly improving. So it goes back to the whole, we won't stop. We're never going to stop, but we got to keep that open dialogue. We've got to create that platform for discussion and feedback loop. So, we won't stop.
Susan, the other thing I hear in what you're saying is the commitment to evolution and the commitment to change. And I think if you are not open to how you may need to evolve and adapt and adjust in your strategy, right? That's actually you succumbing to the pushback. And so in that listening, in that getting specific, in that hearing from your employees and your communities and your customers, et cetera, it gives you the data that you need to then be able to say, how must we shift? How must we evolve? How must we change? And I think that's also a core part of how we sustain, is that commitment to that growth and that evolution.
That's right. Spot on.
Yeah, that's a great add. I just wanted to maybe shift a bit to this notion of workplace culture. You both companies, T-Mobile and Patagonia, have a reputation of fostering inclusivity and a diverse workplace. And really, both of your companies have a brand that is beyond just the product or service you're providing. It's really about your customer and the environment and the future. But culture can sometimes feel abstract, especially if there are individuals who don't work in this kind of an environment. I'd love to hear a little bit more about the pragmatic side of culture, or the practical side. And maybe I'll start with you this time, Susan. What are the elements of, whether it's systems or practices, that really bring this inclusive culture to life at T-Mobile?
I think I'd like to touch upon here some of the things that we've done specific to finance. I think it speaks to the fact that we can actually have some grassroots effort even within a department, within a company. And I give the credit to our CFO, Peter, who has really leaned into DE&I and wanted finance to create their own DE&I committee. And so we sought out, a very diverse slate in a volunteer way of people to join this committee. And this has been underway for about 3 years now, where they're really looking at, where do we as a kind of finance organization want to lean in, very much partnering with HR. And through a combination of getting feedback, surveys, polls, and just, letting that team thrive and come into leadership with ideas and bat that around, they really came back with kind of 4 objectives. And I do want to maybe take the time to kind of go through them. And I do have them here. But, number one is just culture and belonging. And, I think that's pretty much, it talks for itself, is that we want to have that culture and belonging very open and making sure that we're providing an area where people can show up every day, their authentic self and feel good about that. And we're in a safe place. 2 is talent and attraction and development. I'd say we were a little ahead of this, and now we're really picking up this at the total company level, but making sure that, we are really looking at diverse slates. It's like, where do we want to go look for diversity? How do we want to go look for diversity? And then making sure that we have the process and structure, that we also have, a diverse slate of candidates and a diverse slate of people who are actually interviewing for those roles. And so really make sure that we're opening up the aperture to lean in on that, and make sure that again, this is just not someone, in the corner making decisions and not thinking about the bigger picture, because we all know diversity brings greatness to any role and ultimately position. Number 3 is just education and understanding. And so we've got a lot of people very passionate about this area that have basically done roadshows, done brown bag lunches, and like getting kind of the word out. And everyone knows this is being sponsors from the finance leadership. And so again, it just fosters a great, team environment of openness, and something shows that we're really invested in this. I will say I'm excited for the team, because this is so kind of on the forefront of it that now other departments in T-Mobile are starting to kind of copy this model. So it's really great to see. And then last, just how do we create societal equity? So how do we as finance professionals start to lean into society to bring back and to kind of give back to our communities? And I personally love this. We want to do this in giving back to nonprofits. I just last weekend did a kind of finance 101 for women, and it was to my daughter and a bunch of her friends that are in kind of this thing called National Charity League, where they give back their time and effort to nonprofits. And I went in and talked just a little bit about, financial discipline and financial advocacy, and how important it is, particularly for women, right? And this is something I'm personally passionate about. This is my background, but I think it's so important to kind of lean in on this. And this is something the company really supports. And so I've actually even been doing some little finance 101s within the company, and a couple curated to women. So just giving back is a great opportunity for us. So anyway, those are some of the things that we're leaning into and super proud about. And maybe one more thing I'll mention is we've also done some things specific to women within finance, where I had the opportunity to get kind of an executive coach with some speaking tools when I actually got promoted to our senior leadership team about 4 years ago. And I found so many hints and tricks and tools in there that were very applicable to women, that all of a sudden a light bulb went on, and like, I've got to share this. So I ended up hiring this firm to come in and create a series for our women leadership. And it was just so well received, so great for us, just even as a woman community, to get together and share stories. It was just wonderful. So having the ability, really going, again, tops down, having the ability and the support to do things like this are just wonderful.
Those are really a great set of initiatives, Susan. Really, really great to hear. Theresita, how about you? What kinds of initiatives do you have at Patagonia to bring this to life?
I loved hearing about all of those, Susan. And it does make me think about, when you get down to the initiative level, it has to be tied to your core. And so for us, for Patagonia, our core is community and it is activism. And so one of the experiences I had, I'm about 9 months into my Patagonia journey, so I'm still relatively new. But right at about my 5-month anniversary, I attended a conference that was about supporting and engaging our grassroots activists. And the name of the conference literally is Tools for Grassroots Activists Conference. So we got super creative on how we named it. But what I experienced in that was an honoring of culture. It was an honoring of diversity, the stories that we each hold and that we bring to the table. It was getting down to tools and resources and strategies and practices to really support both our grassroots organizations that we partner with and that we want to empower and be a part of fueling their work. But also we had employees that were there as well that got to experience this. So just in that moment, I, in my 5-month tenure into the company, was just so filled, and my cup was filled as we were experiencing this multi-day conference that was really about something that we hold dear and core, which is how do we empower those who are on the front lines doing this work? How do we look across all of the various communities that we serve? And how do we honor traditional knowledge, indigenous knowledge, and just even practices like honoring the land that we are on, and being able to take in and have practices that help us to reflect on where we've been and where we're going, and then to understand things like the power of coalition building, the power of network mapping, all types of things that you can bring not only into the activism work, but actually into the workplace. And so starting to think about, oh, coalition building is actually a skill we really value. What does that look like in the workplace? What does that networking look like in the workplace? What does that strategy look like? Those are all core skills that you're going to use and you need, and that open doors of opportunity, which is we get back to that work of equity, that access to opportunity is a big part. So starting to bring those components inside as well. Another piece that's really core to who we are is community. And so we talk about our what we call our Patagonia community groups. In other places, maybe known as employee resource groups or business resource groups. For us, it was very important to refer to it as a community group because it's bringing together communities of people with shared identity and being able to really create those connections to talk about how you advancing your career, to talk about what are the things that are working and also the places where we're challenged as an organization and to partner with our community groups on how we move pieces forward. And then I'd say another place from a cultural perspective that we're getting really specific on how this shows up is just in our benefits. How do we have a lens with the benefits and the offerings that we have to our employees of what impacts people, both on a systems and structures level, but also in their day-to-day? So we've made a huge commitment around support of families, support of our employees that have children and are giving care. And so we've worked on things like for many, many years, we've had on-site childcare in our larger people centers, and then looking at where the places, because similar to you, Susan, we have our stores, we have our distribution center, we have our call centers, we have our more corporate base, although we don't like the word corporate, we like to be uncorporate. So we're working on a new word, but we have a variety of employee segments. And so what does it look like to serve across the various needs that our employees have? And then the last piece is really this commitment to mental wellness, wholeness, and well-being. And so removing the barriers that show up for that, and then getting really specific. So when we look through the lens of gender, when we look through the lens of anti-racism, when we look through other dimensions of identity, we find that there are barriers that can arise to being able to access care. And so how are we working with our partners and really having a perspective as a company that we want to have really amazing care that allows you to thrive for all? And so what does that look like?
That's great, Theresita. So just a follow-on question to you and around all of these initiatives, what kinds of performance indicators or qualitative measures do you use to track progress, or how do your leaders hold themselves accountable? That would be very interesting to hear.
Yeah, well, one thing that's really important to us is to be specific on how we look at data. And so it's really important to us to be able to listen to our employees. So we have an annual survey that is completed, and we are in this journey to a more frequent pulse to think many organizations are on that journey or are already there. The thing that's important as we're looking at that data is we're able to disaggregate it based on identity. So we invite our employees to share and to self-identify about those identities they hold that are very important to them. And then we're able to look at the data through that lens. So we understand how communities of our employees are experiencing the workplace. And so we look at things like, I believe I can achieve my career goals here. We look at, engagement. We look at questions around pay and benefits. We look at questions around leadership. We also have an index that we call our JEA, which is short for Justice, Equity, and Anti-Racism Index. And we're constantly looking at how might we need to evolve that. So we started to disaggregate the data through the lens of identity so we understand what's taken shape. And a principle for us, again, that attending to that change happens in the specific, is that we also look through the lens of intersectionality. So understanding that when you hold multiple dimensions of identities that may have historically experienced marginalization or oppression, those intersections matter. And so you see these compounding effects. And we want to understand how that's showing up in our workforce so we can be very specific in how we attend to it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. That's great. Susan, you also mentioned an employee survey. I was wondering if you had, in addition to that, want to elaborate on that and any other measures that T-Mobile.
Yeah, I will kind of just ride on what Theresita just said, is that we do have a survey. It's called Our Voice. We've been doing this for many years, but it's just continued to evolve. I think I mentioned, we started carving out a very specific element for DE&I, and those questions within there are also evolving, and what questions we have, we're looking for inclusion index and other data that we can actually gather. So again, more intel gives us more, feedback loop to tell us more what actions and what maybe policies that we need to put in place to really create this environment that we want. So we are doing that and constantly learning, and it is a journey. By no means do we have this code cracked. But we will, we won't stop. But something else I think I'd like to mention, which I think we're really proud of, being a public company for over 10 years, and now after the merger has kind of like settled down, we for the first time published a corporate responsibility report. We published that in 2021. It was the first time we had done that. And so it was fascinating as a public company. It really, by the process that the teams went through to publish this, we looked at through a people lens, a customer lens, supplier lens, like all these lenses, environmental lens, right? And you really had to actually have some really good dialogue. It was a really great forcing function to really, what kind of data do we have? What do we want to publish? Are we ready, right? All these questions kind of came about. So I'd still say that we're evolving in that journey, but certainly, proud of that work. And I think with that, we've been able to make some commitments publicly. Like, we are very much committed to pay equity. We make sure that when we're looking at jobs, we're making sure that we're constantly on a frequent basis looking at the market. We want to make sure that we're looking at experience levels. We want to and make sure that we are not, putting any, despite any type of gender, religion, whatever it may be, making sure that's very, very, equitable in terms of our process. I really like that we put some things in practice, like we won't ask you what your historical pay is, because we know, and I know as a woman, sometimes that pay equity is there just historically, and you can never break it. So if we're asking people about their historical, pay, then you're stuck in the same thing. And this is the time to change that when you're shifting to a new job. So, we've put practices in place like that, I'm super proud of. And Theresita, I'm really glad that you brought up benefits, because it's something else I've got to be involved with tangentially, being, on the finance side, is we're always looking at our benefits and benchmarking, how our benefits stack up. Where are we actually, doing a really great job? Maybe where we're under indexing in an area and where we need to kind of invest. And so we look at that constantly, making sure that we're bringing forth the best portfolio of options for our people so that they can thrive. And again, make this just a great place to work and something people are really proud about. And again, getting back to equity. And then I will also mention, a couple of years back, we actually moved to a nationwide minimum pay of $20 per hour. And this particularly pertains to our call centers. So again, putting just good practices in place and being loud and proud about it and very public has been, just an honor and feel proud about what we're doing for our folks.
Well, it's really impressive to hear how both of your organizations are not only talking about this inclusive culture, gender equity, but also have measures in place to actually track and hold yourselves accountable. So I think that's really, showing where the rubber hits the road. I wanted to shift gears now more towards you as individuals and talk a little bit more about your personal experiences. Obviously, the individual side of leadership is really what defines this in a culture, in an organization. And maybe Susan, starting with you, would love to hear you share more about your approach to leadership, how you develop others, and how do you ensure that women are heard and supported in not only in your finance organization, but beyond. And I know you touched a little bit about this on some of the initiatives, but really to personalize it and what you're doing.
Yeah, maybe I'll start the journey with just my background. I grew up in a family where my voice was heard, and I had an opportunity to from the get-go be vocal. And I was very heavily involved in sports, and I just love being part of a community, part of a team, and I think that's where my leadership just kind of naturally evolved in some of these sports. And that translated when I went off to college and was playing soccer, but the knees gave out. So it kind of forced me to migrate into a career. But in school, I really just took my major at the time, accounting, very seriously, and just enjoyed that. And I really enjoyed in class starting to lead discussions. I just loved being around people. And my professors very quickly are like, Susan, we're watching you. Would you mind being the tutor for the class and this and that? So I had the opportunity to be asked to kind of lead. And that was just something I liked and enjoyed. And I've just translated that into my work. And over the years, I've been really blessed to meet some strong women leaders that I've emulated, always like looking around to see, who's doing what and how. And I like to kind of emulate that. And I also would say, I think because of the way I was raised and always being, very competitive, want to be part of a team, I never shied away from being in a room of men. It never bothered me. I was there. I'm a human. You're a human. And, we're all in this together. And so we're equals as far as I'm concerned. I think that helped me along the way. And then I would just say this, as we were going through and starting to do surveys and seeing, we talk a lot about DE&I and equity, and all of a sudden one day I reflected and I looked around the room and I looked at my leadership team, mostly women. And I was like, oh, wait, do I have a bias here? Like what's going on? And I had to really reflect for a little bit and think about it. I'm like, no. These are the best goddamn employees and leaders that I have seen and had, and they're just like along for the journey. And it's been an awesome, awesome opportunity and experience, and just have loved supporting these women who have deserved that seat at the table, and want to continue to foster that. So I think just having a team of strong women leaders has been very telling. And then the last thing I would say is, when I had the opportunity to join the SLT, I have to give a lot of credit to a woman named Callie Fields, who was already on the SLT. That's our senior leadership team. And she was a great advocate of me. And that was like very pivotal. And I think really pivotal to my promotion to that level. And I think that was also something that I want to turn around and give back. And so my greatest, moment, and I think, what I'm maybe most proud about over my whole career is that I did make it to the SLT. There's now 4 women on the SLT out of 13. 10 years ago, when I started this journey and started talking about when we became the Uncarrier, there was 0. And so to be part of this has just been amazing. And I think if I can be an example, and if I can bring people along and I can share my stories, and those are good stories and those are learning moments, they're both, all the better. And I love it. Just love it.
Well, Susan, you talk about wanting to emulate other women leaders, and I'm sure others are now doing that with you because you represent the next generation of leadership. That's really wonderful to hear. And you do have an all-female leadership team, which is pretty amazing. And you didn't even realize it, which just goes to show that it was just done by the talent, and then you looked around and they just happen to be women.
Now, I do have a couple men there now, so it's a little more of a mix. So, but it was something to be aware of, right?
Yeah. Theresita, so, this personal leadership style, and how do you do this, and how do you empower others? I would love to hear your story.
Yeah, I would say I'm also going to go back to more of my origin. And so when I look back, my grandparents as children were sharecroppers. They were not able to go to school past 8, 11, 13 formally, and they had to go and work with their parents, not because they were not smart, but it was the system that was in play at that time. They are the wisest people that I knew. They are now past, and their home was filled floor to ceiling with books. And so they would always say, Theresita, My grandfather actually called me Terry T. So with a Southern accent, Terry T,
Cute.
you have to be a learner. You have to be a server and you have to be a builder. And that's what I saw emulated in their lives. And so they pushed us. So my mom was then the first person to go to college in our family. And she was the first person to go into corporate in our family. And so that first generation. And so she paved that way. And then I come along with my siblings and I went to school for engineering. And when I came out, I worked in the world of manufacturing. Tell you all about Bounty and Charmin and Pampers and Loves from what you see on your shelves, where that you have delivered to your door. And when I got there, I was one of 3 Black women that were in this plant, this massive plant. And what made a difference for me in all of that was mentorship. There was always someone who made time for me to have conversations, to talk about the things that I experienced, to give me guidance. And I remember who each of those people are. So when I think about that, when I introduce myself, I will often pause and reintroduce myself. And so I'd love to be able to do that here and say, I'm Theresita Richard. I'm the daughter of Melvin and Shirley, the granddaughter of Willie and Pearl, the great-granddaughter of Rainey, and the greats of many who came before me, who I do not know, but they are with me here today, yea, even right now. And I do that because it's an honoring of where I've been, and it's a reminder to always continue to pave that path for those who will come behind me. There are many rooms that I go in where I may be the first who looks like me. I may be one of very few, or I may be the only. And my commitment in honoring of my ancestors and in paving that way is that I won't be the last. So, Susan, what you shared about is really that mentorship, taking that time, that sponsorship, that is deeply important to me, and creating those conditions where everyone is truly able to thrive, to be seen, to feel valued, to feel heard, to feel like they are able to contribute in their fullness and in the wholeness of who they are. And that's my personal mission, to create the spaces where that can be true.
Love it.
What an incredible journey in your family, Theresita. And now you're also bringing this, the collective experiences that you've had into your workspace and your team. And part of this must be how you're building. You're 9 months at Patagonia, right? So probably just getting started.
Just getting started. Excited for the journey ahead, for sure.
Yeah. And in terms of creating new pathways, are there things that you're now starting to do in terms of specific, are there individuals or any stories that you would share about how this is translating into the sponsorship and supporting others, kind of the, paying it forward?
Yeah, I would say really a keen focus on both mentorship and sponsorship, because I believe you need both, and there's a difference. And so mentorship is when you're able to call that person and you can have the conversations and you can get the deep feedback and sometimes the challenging feedback that you need to know where you need to shift and adapt and how you navigate the world. And sponsorship is you need that person to speak your name when you're not in the room. Right. And to know where those opportunities are and to open those doors so you have access to those. Then when you get in, you tap back into mentorship because you're going to do it. Like once you're in, the door has been opened, you got to get in there and perform. Like those things are really important. And so for me, something that I just love, it was actually part of my yes to Patagonia, is I had an opportunity to spend time in our archives. And our team of archivists, one of our who is our fierce leader of the archives, her name is Val Franco, and she is a leader, a woman who deeply inspires me. She's been with Patagonia 50 years and started as a seamstress, has seen all the things. And now she, with her team, they are building and cultivating and nurturing this archive where we're able to go back and tap into the stories of the company. And part of what we've been talking about is the archive is not just a collection of the past stories. We think about it as an igniting function where you're able to go back and grab the lessons and get the inspiration and then pave a new future forward. And so really being able to have intentional experiences with our people around the archives are the active conversations we've been having on how does that take shape? How do we take these Patagonia life lessons and really codify and articulate them and have the artifacts that go along with that? And then how do we connect those dots with mentorship? Then as we look at our talent practices, how do we begin to really embed this notion of sponsorship and help people to understand how those two things work together? So very much at the beginning of the journey, and there's so much goodness that we're in those building stages around. So I'd say have me back. Have me back so I can tell you stories of how that is going and where we go from here. But there's just such this rich goodness of story and history that and purpose that we're able to draw from as we move forward into the future.
Yes, and individual connections, right?
And individual connections. Maybe I'll have Val with me because she is just a firecracker. She inspires me every single day and she makes me better. So
That's very cool.
Susan, any additional thoughts on this mentoring or sponsorship? I love the distinction, by the way, because that's a very important thing. We often blend the two concepts, but sponsorship is really the person who has your back when you're not in the room. I love that.
I think Theresita really nailed it with that dialogue, and it's certain. I certainly lean into it. It goes back to my earlier comments where I've got an open door. I want people to know that I'm here for them, that I can provide mentorship and just start to provide stories and context. And maybe what I'll talk a bit, if you don't mind, Shivani. I know you and I were talking a couple days ago about the evolution of leadership. And I think, what have I learned around leadership over time? And one thing that has come to mind is that in my early career as leadership, and I'm growing and start to lead people, I'll be honest, there was a little bit of, hey, I kind of also want to kind of control the situation, right? And that was a drive and a way that I was going. And over time, I will say what has changed is one, having kids. All of a sudden,
Can't control.
patience has had to come into play and know that, hey, this isn't about you, sitting here trying to control and define everything. This is about, allowing your kids to play a role and start to shape the narrative. And just as I bring that into my workplaces, this is not for me just to lead and tell everyone what to do. This is a team, and let people lean in and really move from maybe a true control approach to an enablement approach of just you're the leader, but you're enabling the team around you to make these decisions and come to a good solution. So that has been a really interesting pivot that I kind of reflected on based on our conversation. I wanted to share, and I think that's been powerful, and it's allowed me to now just kind of sit back a little bit and draw on, again, the experience, draw on the stories. You talk about these archives and just draw on the pitfalls and the lessons learned. And those lessons, turn into how do you get better, and being able to share that and being very open about it. And I think that's been very useful to me. And I think people have appreciated the authenticity and the transparency that I bring. Because, hey, it hasn't been a bed of roses. And I think that people can relate to that.
Okay. Well, we have now just maybe a bit over 10, 11 minutes to take some questions from the audience. And I have a couple that I wanted to ask both of you. The first one is about advice. And what advice would you give to someone who is looking to emulate or really forge a path like you both have done, which is to drive change and diversity and inclusion and this kind of leadership in their own organizations, but they don't know where to start? How might you, what advice would you give to the up and coming leader who wants to make a difference? So, Theresita, maybe.
I would say let curiosity lead you. There's often, as we move in our careers. And we're kind of taught this in school, right? Get the answer right, get the answer right.
Yeah.
I think the more powerful thing is, are you asking the right questions, right? And letting that curiosity lead you. Get curious about what's happening around you. Get curious about what's happening in your business and ask those questions, because you never know when that's going to open a door for you to be able to step through to work on a new project, to work on a new discovery, to solve a challenge that the company is facing. And through that curiosity and walking through that door, you will gain those experiences that you can build on for the future.
Good. Susan?
Yeah,
anything?
I will pile right on. That was going to be my number one statement. It's about having that curiosity. It really does drive a path. Maybe what I can add to that, and it's something I like to do when I have discussions around mentoring folks, is, first be really true to yourself. What is that you are really looking for, and really knowing that, I think is important, number one. But number two, when you're starting to look at opening doors and having that like conversation with others about your dream, it's how do you start to network, and network beyond just your core team that you work within. You really want to get to know others, and the more people you can get to know, not only in your own discipline, but across the company, those connections and that networking is invaluable. So what I usually do as an exercise, I said, hey, I want to sit down with you and be very strategic and think about who are those people you want to get to know? Who do you think are those people that are maybe interesting to talk to in just an informational, way? And anyone around here I know is always willing to take time to talk to you. But just having, the proactiveness to kind of reach out, introduce yourself, and get to know others across the organization. So I usually say, let's pick 12 people. Let's kind of think about the sequencing of that. Let's make sure it's diverse in terms of the people you pick. And then let's talk about, hey, do you need a warm, kind of handoff or intro? Because I'm glad to do that. Or maybe your boss is in a good position to do that intro, but just open up your network. And that will allow you to have those conversations, to let your curiosity thrive. And when people know you have a passion, or they know that maybe you want to head in a certain direction, and you've talked to them and you've got to know that. And so somewhere down the road, they're like, oh, I want to do this. Oh, hey, I talked to this individual who was kind of interested in that. I should reach back out, right? Those are where doors open. And I can't tell you how powerful that is. And, that's how I've basically found my jobs over time. It's just keeping connected to people. And then they know your interests. They know where your heart and where your passion is. And it all kind of starts to come together.
Yeah. Curiosity and building powerful networks are both really important to driving change in an organization. And maybe this question should have come before, but there's one question that just came up, which is, what are the basic qualities or competencies that women need? Are they different now than they were when you guys started your careers to be successful, not just driving change, but just to be able to be successful in the corporate environment? That was a broader question that came up.
I say stop apologizing. Sorry, not sorry.
I'm sorry so much. Sorry, not sorry.
I'm sorry. I believe I'm actively working on it myself. So I'm speaking to myself as I'm speaking to you today. And there's that piece where we will temper our language. We'll temper our idea. We'll filter our idea 20 times before we get it into the room and others have already spoken and carried it forward, right? And so stop apologizing, get yourself in there. And so that means you're going to take some risk and it's going to be scary, but let that pit in your stomach and the sweaty palms or the tingly fingers, whatever that is, be your signal that I need to speak, that I need to get into the conversation, and I'm not going to apologize for what I have to say.
Love it.
Yeah, I think that is spot on. And I know there's been so many studies done where maybe a job opportunity, comes up, and a man will look at that and maybe only have 20% qualifications. They don't care. They're going to throw their name in the hat and they're going to talk a good game. And then the woman who probably has 80% of the qualifications still isn't quite sure they should take the job because that 20% is still hanging out there. They're not fully confident. And I personally, can say that I have experienced that. There was an opportunity back again 10 years ago, Shivani, right when we were meeting, that I could take the SVP role. And I really had to think hard. Should I do that? Am I qualified to do that? I had all these questions. And finally, someone had to kind of slap me on the side of the head going, Susan, you're already doing the job. What are you thinking? Right. And I had to kind of snap in and say, okay, yeah, I am. Right. And we do, as women, do kind of seem to hang back, make sure we have every box checked before I throw our names in the hat. And we've got to kind of push through it. And to your point, it's not easy, not necessarily comfortable, but we need to show up just like the men show up.
Mm-hmm. I think it's so interesting that both of you spoke about this, the confidence and how we show up. And it's not about the fundamental skill sets or competencies. It's about the mindset of confidence that we need to set ourselves apart. There are a lot of studies where young boys and girls in studies through math and science in the early years do just as well, neck and neck. But then there's a sort of a gap that emerges because the perception that girls have around pursuing some of these topics, and we see that in all of these studies around STEM. So it's wonderful that you both speak to that. So maybe as one of the closing questions, I will ask you both is, what advice would you give to your younger self today, based on all the things that we talk about, all the experiences we've all collectively had? If you could go back to yourself, I don't know, at the start of your career, at the very beginning of your journey, what would you say to yourself now? Whoever wants to start first.
I'd say take risk and remember you're not alone.
For me, I think some of the lessons were early on. I was pretty eager and this young woman leader, and I didn't have kids, and I worked a lot, and I think I expected others to be just like me and wanting to do the same things. And I had people that had kids, and I didn't have kids at the time. And I had this expectation that everyone should just be thinking of things the way I think of it. And it was a lesson learned when I had kids. Let's put it that way. That I probably looked back on that saying, I needed to be a little bit more open. I needed to be a little bit more empathetic to understand people's situations and take the time to do that. That was definitely a big learning in my career journey.
So going back and telling yourself that, hey, be more open, and that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Would you both like to take a moment and just say any kind of final thoughts, anything that we didn't touch on, just share anything in closing with the audience? Susan, would you like to start?
I think I would just close by one, thank you again for allowing me to be part of this. It's been fantastic. I think my closing statement will be follow your gut. Mm-hmm. I have had so many opportunities or decisions, and at the end of the day, I can, I try to mathematically decide and do all this weighting and everything. And at the end of the day, you got to follow your gut and be true to yourself.
Be true to yourself. Theresita, any final thoughts?
Yeah, final thoughts. So there's an amazing woman that I follow. I encourage you all to follow her as well. Her name is Octavia Rahim. She's an author, a leader, coach, and yoga practitioner. And she has a deep commitment around rest as a leadership practice. And so I would say, take your rest. That's your leadership superpower, right? So take your rest. And she also asks herself this question each day, and then she journals about it. And I've just been sitting with it. And it is, what will need to be remembered today, tomorrow, 100 years from now? When you get clear on that, that's your work.
Wow. That's amazing. Well, thank you both so much, Susan and Theresita, for taking time out of your day and sharing your experiences and inspirational comments. I'm sure that our audience was just thrilled and riveted as I was. I feel very privileged that I had the chance to be the one to host you on this panel. And thank you, everyone, for participating in Kearney's International Women's Day Forum today. Thank you so much.